My mother stood in the center of the marble lobby and pointed a manicured finger at me as if I were a stranger. She ordered security to escort this woman out right in front of my staff. She had no idea that I owned the building. The biometric scanners recognized my face, and I had been setting this legal trap for 8 years. When the elevator doors finally opened, the only person being removed from the premises was her. My name is Mallory Keene, and if there is one thing I have learned in 31 years of life, it is that the most dangerous predators do not hide in the dark. They stand under crystal chandeliers, wearing silk and smelling of expensive perfume. The humidity of Port Rowan clung to my skin as I pushed through the revolving glass doors of the Keene Holdings headquarters. It was a Tuesday afternoon, specifically 2 o'clock, and the Florida sun was relentless outside. Inside, the air conditioning was set to a crisp 68 degrees, a temperature calculated to keep alertness high and comfort moderate. I adjusted the strap of my canvas messenger bag on my shoulder. I was not dressed like the owner of the building. I was wearing a pair of dark linen trousers and a simple white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to my elbows. Having just come from a site inspection at one of our logistics warehouses near the docks, my hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and I wore zero makeup. To the untrained eye, or perhaps the arrogant eye, I looked like a courier or maybe a low-level intern running late with a coffee order. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and brushed steel, designed to intimidate as much as it was to welcome. The sound of my loafers on the stone floor was a quiet, rhythmic scuffing, easily drowned out by the sharp, authoritative clacking of high heels echoing near the reception desk. I stopped 10 feet away from the security turnstiles. I knew that sound. I knew that specific cadence of walking that demanded the world move out of its way. Standing at the front desk were 2 women who looked like they had stepped out of a magazine spread for Southern aristocracy. The older one wore a cream-colored blazer that I knew cost more than $4,000, paired with oversized sunglasses she had yet to remove despite being indoors. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection that defied the humidity outside. Diane Keene, my mother. Next to her stood my sister, Sloane. She was gripping the handle of a designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked thinner than the last time I had seen her, her posture rigid, her eyes darting around the lobby as if she were expecting an ambush. I stood still, letting the cold air of the lobby dry the sweat on the back of my neck. I had not seen them in 8 years, not since the night I packed my life into a sedan and drove away from Red Hollow. Seeing them now, in the sanctuary I had built with my own hands, felt like a violation of physics. 2 worlds that should never have collided were now occupying the same breathable space. Renee, my lead receptionist, looked terrified. She was a young woman, barely 22, with a bright smile that was currently faltering under assault. "I am telling you, we are here to see the director," Diane snapped, her voice carrying across the silent expanse of the lobby. It was the voice she used on waitstaff, on housekeepers, and for a very long time, on me. It was a tone that assumed no one would dare check her credentials, because her very existence was the credential. Renee typed frantically on her keyboard. "Ma'am, I am looking at the schedule for today, and I do not show an appointment for a Ms. Diane Keene. If you could just wait one moment, I can call the executive assistant line to see if there has been a mistake." "There is no mistake," Diane hissed. She leaned over the high counter, invading Renee's personal space. "We are representing a major investor group. We do not need an appointment. We need to go up, now." I took a step forward. My movement caught Sloane's eye first. She blinked, looking at me. For a second, there was zero recognition. She saw the messy hair, the canvas bag, the lack of jewelry. She saw a nobody, but then something clicked, a tilt of the head, a memory of a shadow she used to ignore in the hallway. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Diane followed her gaze. She turned, her heels scraping sharply against the floor. When she saw me, her expression did not soften. There was no motherly warmth, no shock of recognition that leads to an embrace. Her face contorted into a mask of sheer, unadulterated disdain. She looked at me the way one looks at a stain on a silk rug. She did not see the CEO of Keen Holdings. She saw the 23-year-old failure she had cast aside to pay for a wedding. She saw the girl who was not worth the investment. "Well," Diane said, her voice dripping with ice, "look what the tide washed in." The lobby was busy. At least 15 employees were moving through the space, some heading to the elevators, others returning from lunch. At the sound of her voice, heads turned. The ambient noise of the building seemed to drop by 50 decibels. I did not smile. I did not frown. I kept my face entirely neutral, a skill I had paid a lot of money to perfect over the last decade. "Can I help you?" I asked. My voice was calm, low, and steady. Diane let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Help me? You?" She looked me up and down, sneering at my linen trousers. "I suppose you could get us some coffee while we wait for the real adults to finish their business. Or are you here to clean the floors?" Sloane reached out and touched Diane's arm, a nervous gesture. "Mom, maybe we should not—" "Quiet, Sloane," Diane snapped, shaking her off. She turned back to the reception desk, pointing a finger at me as if accusing me of a crime. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The standards here are clearly lacking if they let just anyone wander in from the street." Renee looked from Diane to me, her eyes wide. She opened her mouth to speak, to say my title, to say the words that would end this charade instantly. I caught Renee's eye and gave a microscopic shake of my head. "No, not yet. Let her dig." I took another step closer, crossing the invisible boundary between the public zone and the secure zone. "I think you should lower your voice," I said. "You are causing a scene." The audacity of my command made Diane's face flush a deep, angry red. She was not used to being told what to do. Certainly not by the daughter she had written off as a bad asset. She drew herself up to her full height, clutching her clutch purse like a weapon. "Do not speak to me like that," she spat. "You have absolutely no idea who we are dealing with. We are here to meet with the ownership of this firm. You are nothing but a distraction." She turned her head sharply toward the security station where Calvin was standing. Calvin was the head of my security detail. He was a former military police officer, 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle, and the kind of man who could spot a threat 3 blocks away. He had been working for me for 5 years. He knew my coffee order, he knew my schedule, and he knew exactly who signed the checks that paid for his daughter's college tuition. Calvin was staring at me, his face a mask of professional confusion. He had started to step forward when I entered, his instinct to greet me, but he had frozen when Diane launched her tirade. He was waiting for a signal. Diane did not see his hesitation. She only saw a uniform. "Security," she barked, waving her hand dismissively in my direction. "Escort this woman out. She does not work here." The sentence hung in the air, echoing off the marble walls. It was the hook, it was the bait, and she had swallowed it whole. I saw 3 junior analysts from the data department stop in their tracks near the elevator bank. They were holding coffees, their conversations dead in their throats. They looked at Diane, then they looked at me. They knew who I was. They knew that the name on their pay stubs matched the name on my birth certificate. The tension in the room pulled tight, vibrating like a piano wire about to snap. Calvin took a step forward, his heavy boots thudding on the floor. He looked at Diane, then he looked at me. His eyes asked a silent question. "Do you want me to remove her?" I held his gaze and gave another subtle signal, a slight lift of the chin. "Wait." I looked back at my mother, the woman who had traded my future for a wedding venue, the woman who had told me I was not the type of person who could run a business. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. My voice was not loud, but in the dead silence of the lobby, it carried to every corner. "Are you sure you want to say that? Right here? Right now?" Diane looked at me with pure hatred. "What are you babbling about?" I gestured vaguely to the ceiling, where a small black dome sat discreetly in the corner. "There are cameras, Diane, high-definition video, audio recording. Everything you say is being logged." Are you absolutely certain you want your opening statement to this company to be an order to remove me? Diane scoffed, adjusting the collar of her expensive blazer. I do not care about the cameras. I care about competence. And clearly, this place lacks it if they let vagrants harass potential investors. She turned back to Calvin, her patience evaporating. She snapped her fingers at him. Did you hear me? I said get her out of here. She is bothering us. She is a nobody. Do your job. Sloane looked physically ill. She was staring at me, her eyes tracing the lines of my face, realizing that the sister she remembered, the quiet, compliant doormat, was gone. She saw the way I stood. She saw the way the staff was looking at me, not with pity, but with deference. Mom, stop, Sloane whispered, her voice trembling. Mom, look at her. I am looking at her, Diane shouted, her voice cracking with rage. I am looking at a failure who is trying to ruin my meeting. She slammed her hand down on the reception desk, startling Renee. Call the owner, right now. Tell him that Diane Keene is here, and I am being harassed by a disgruntled former, whatever she is. Renee typed a single key. She did not pick up the phone. She just looked at me. I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I let the silence stretch out for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was enough time for the reality of the situation to soak into the walls. Diane turned back to Calvin, her face twisted into a snarl. Why are you just standing there? I gave you an order. Calvin moved. He did not move toward me. He walked past me, his stride long and purposeful. He stopped directly in front of Diane. He towered over her, his shadow falling across her expensive cream blazer. He did not reach for his radio. He did not reach for his handcuffs. He simply clasped his hands behind his back and looked down at her with the impassive stare of a man who has seen war zones and finds angry socialites unimpressive. The lobby was so quiet you could hear the hum of the hard drives in the server room 3 floors up. Ma'am, Calvin said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. Diane looked up at him, expecting compliance. Yes, finally. Get her out. Calvin shook his head slowly. Ma'am, he repeated, dropping the volume of his voice so it was intimate, lethal, and absolutely final. Before I can take any action regarding personnel, I need to verify your identification first. Diane's mouth fell open. Excuse me? I need to see your ID, Calvin said, not moving an inch, and I need to see the visitor pass that authorizes you to be shouting in this lobby, because right now, the only person disturbing the peace in my building is you. The silence in the lobby was a physical weight, but my mind was no longer in Port Rowan. The sight of my mother's face, twisted in that familiar cocktail of entitlement and disdain, acted like a rift in time. It dragged me backward, pulling me away from the cool marble and the hum of servers, all the way back to a humid night in Red Hollow, Georgia. It took me back to the moment I realized that in the ledger of the Keene family, I was not an asset. I was a liability to be liquidated for quick cash. It was 8 years ago. I was 23 years old, fueled by cheap coffee and the relentless optimism that only exists before your dreams are crushed by the people who are supposed to protect them. I had just graduated, not with the MRS degree my mother had hoped for, but with a vision. I had spent my final semester building a comprehensive business model for an e-commerce consulting firm. I had market analysis, I had client profiles. I had a 5-year projection that showed a return on investment of 200% by year 3. I sat at the heavy oak dining table in my parents' house, the wood polished to a shine that felt greasy under my fingertips. Across from me sat the tribunal. My mother, Diane, my father, Victor, and sitting at the head of the table like a crowned princess was Sloane. Sloane had just gotten engaged to Graham Halford, in Red Hollow. The name Halford was the closest thing we had to royalty. They owned the textile mills, the bank, and half the city council. Marrying a Halford was not just a wedding, it was a merger. It was the culmination of my mother's entire life's work. I had called the family meeting to present my business plan. I had a binder, color-coded and tabbed. I had worn my best blazer. I was ready to ask for their blessing to use the savings account I had been building since I was 16. Combined with the trust fund my grandmother had left me specifically for my education or career, it was not a fortune. It was roughly $25,000. But it was enough for a server, a small office lease, and the incorporation fees. I opened the binder to page 1. "I have the first 3 clients lined up," I said, my voice steady despite the way my father was checking his watch. "They are local artisans who want to move to a global shipping model. If I can get their logistics sorted by Q3, I can take a 5% commission on—" Diane cut me off with a wave of her hand. It was a gesture so casual it stung more than a slap. "Mallory, honey, pause for a second," she said. She was smiling, but it was that tight, strained smile she wore when she was about to deliver bad news that she had convinced herself was actually good news. "We are so proud of your little project. Really, it is very cute, but we need to discuss something more immediate." I froze. My hand hovered over the profit-loss statement. "What do you mean?" Victor cleared his throat. He did not look me in the eye. He looked at the wall behind me, focusing on a portrait of himself. "We have been looking at the venue for the reception. The Halford estate is expecting the grand ballroom at the St. Regis in Atlanta. It is the only place that can accommodate their guest list." I nodded slowly. "Okay, that sounds nice for Sloan." "It is perfect for Sloan," Diane corrected. "But the deposit is substantial, and because the Halfords are covering the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon, it is our responsibility to secure the venue. Tradition, you know." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my spine. The money in the family accounts had been dwindling for years. Victor's construction supply business had been bleeding cash since the housing market dipped, though they refused to change their spending habits. "So?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "So," Victor said, his voice booming with forced authority, "we had to move some assets around, just to cover the liquidity gap. We accessed the secondary accounts this morning to wire the deposit." The room went silent. The secondary accounts. "My account?" I whispered. The question felt like it was made of glass. Diane reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cool and dry. "We knew you would understand. It is for your sister. It is the most important day of her life. Mallory, you are not using that money right now anyway. It was just sitting there." I pulled my hand back as if she had burned me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is my money. I earned that waitressing, and the rest was from Grandma. She left it to me, not to the Keene family wedding fund." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "Watch your tone. We are a family. We share resources. When the wedding is over, and Graham settles the accounts, we will put it back." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. He was not a strong patriarch making hard choices. He was a weak man buying prestige he could not afford. I opened my binder again, my hands shaking. "I do not want it back later. I need it now. Look at this plan. Dad, look at the numbers. I can turn that $25,000 into $100,000 in 2 years. This is a real business." Victor glanced at the spreadsheet for less than a second before looking away. He let out a sigh of exasperation. "Mallory, be realistic. You are not the owner type. You are a worker. You support people. That is your strength. You are not built to lead a company." The words hit me in the chest like a hollow-point bullet. You are not the owner type. Sloan, who had been checking her manicure, finally looked up. She let out a soft, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Mal, come on. It is just a little online shop thing. Graham says the internet bubble is going to burst anyway. You should be thanking us. We are saving you from wasting Grandma's money on a hobby." I looked at my sister. She was glowing, radiant with the promise of wealth and status. She had never worked a day in her life. She had never stayed up until 4 a.m. debugging code or packing boxes, and she was sitting there, wearing a diamond the size of a grape, telling me my life's ambition was a hobby. I took a deep breath. I tried to be the rational one. I tried to be the professional I wanted to become. "Fine," I said. I pulled a notepad from my bag. If you are taking the money, I want a loan agreement. I want a repayment schedule signed by both of you, with interest, effective immediately after the wedding. Diane looked at me as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. A contract? With your parents? Yes, I said. If it is a loan, treat it like one. Diane's face hardened. The mask of the sweet Southern belle dropped, revealing the steel-reinforced concrete beneath. We raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head. And now, when your sister has a chance to elevate this entire family, to secure our future with the Halfords, you want to nickel and dime us? I am not nickel and diming you, I said, my voice rising. I am asking you not to steal my future to pay for her party. Diane stood up. She was not a tall woman, but in that moment, she seemed to fill the room with her indignation. If you do not support this family, she said, her voice icy and precise, cutting through the humid air like a scalpel, then you can worry about your own future, on your own. We do not harbor selfishness in this house. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Victor. He was studying the tablecloth. I looked at Sloane. She was smirking. Just a little, a tiny uplift of the corner of her mouth that said, I win. I realized then that there was no negotiation. There was no misunderstanding. I was the spare part. I was the organ donor kept on ice just in case the vital heart needed a transplant. They had not borrowed my money. They had seized it because they believed they owned me. I closed my binder. I did not slam it. I clicked the rings shut with a soft, metallic snap. Okay, I said. Diane blinked, expecting a fight, or tears, or an apology. Okay. I picked up the binder. I picked up my laptop case. Okay, I repeated. I understand perfectly. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I did not go to my bedroom to cry. I went to my room to work. That night, while the house slept, I packed. I did not take everything. I left the clothes Diane had bought me for church. I left the jewelry Victor had given me for Sweet 16, which I knew he had bought on credit. I took my laptop. I took my external hard drives. I took the 3 business suits I had bought at a thrift store and tailored myself. I loaded my beat-up Honda Civic under the cover of darkness. The Georgia night was thick with the sound of crickets and the heavy scent of magnolias, a smell that used to mean home, but now smelled like stagnation. I paused at the front door. I looked back at the shadows of the house. I could have left a note. I could have screamed. I could have poured bleach on Sloane's wedding dress. But I did none of those things. Anger, I realized, was a resource. It was fuel, and I was not going to waste a drop of it on them. I got into my car. The engine sputtered, then turned over. I backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. I did not turn on my headlights until I was at the end of the street. I drove toward the interstate, heading south. I had $78 in my wallet and a quarter tank of gas. I had no safety net. I had no family. As I watched the limit signs for Red Hollow fade in my rearview mirror, I made a vow. It was not a wish. It was a contract with myself. I would never ask them for a single thing again. I would not ask for money. I would not ask for love. I would not ask for approval. They had bet everything on Sloane. They had sold my potential to buy her a centerpiece. Fine, I whispered to the empty car. Keep the deposit. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Because the next time you see me, I said to the dark road ahead, I will be the one holding the invoice. I drove through the night, the tears finally coming only when I crossed the state line into Florida. Hot and silent, tracking down my face, but I did not turn around. I drove until the sun came up over the ocean, burning away the mist, burning away the girl who thought she mattered to them. That girl died in Red Hollow. The woman who arrived in Port Rowan the next morning was someone else entirely. She was empty. She was broke, and she was absolutely terrifyingly free. Port Rowan was not a paradise. It was a humid, salt-sprayed grid of tourists, retirees, and locals trying to sell things to both groups. For the first 3 months, My entire world was reduced to a 5-foot section of a beige corduroy sofa in my friend Becca's apartment. Becca was a college roommate who had seen me at my best, and now, without judgment, she was watching me at my rock bottom. She gave me a pillow, a thin fleece blanket, and a key. I gave her a promise that I would be out in 90 days. My life split into 2 distinct, exhausting shifts. From 10 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. I was a waitress at a diner near the marina called the Rusty Anchor. I wore a polyester uniform that smelled permanently of fryer grease and ketchup. I poured coffee for fishermen who tipped in quarters and tourists who complained that the ice in their tea was melting too fast in the Florida heat. I smiled until my jaw ached. I took abuse from managers who could not spell the word logistics, but felt qualified to lecture me on time management. Every time a customer snapped their fingers at me, I thought of my mother. It was a useful exercise. It kept my spine stiff and my mouth shut. I saved every single dollar. I did not buy new clothes. I did not buy coffee. I ate the mistakes from the diner kitchen: burnt toast, cold fries, soup that had sat out too long. I opened a bank account at a credit union 3 blocks away. I named the savings folder Freedom Fund. I did not label it Revenge. Revenge is emotional, and emotions are expensive. Freedom is a calculation. It is a specific number in a bank account that allows you to say no. At 5 in the afternoon, the second shift began. I would shower off the smell of grease, put on one of the 3 crisp shirts I had stolen from my old life, and take my laptop to the public library until it closed at 9. After that, I worked on Becca's kitchen counter until 2 in the morning. I was not just looking for a job, I was building a case. My target was a business called Miller's Seafood Market. It was a local institution that had been bleeding money for 5 years. I knew this because I had spent a week watching the foot traffic. I saw the delivery trucks idling too long. I saw the inventory rotting in the display cases. I saw the owner, a man named Elias Miller, sitting behind the counter with his head in his hands, staring at a ledger that I guessed was covered in red ink. They had no website. Their Facebook page had not been updated since 2012. They were invisible to the thousands of tourists searching for fresh seafood on their phones. I walked in on a Tuesday, carrying my laptop and a distinct lack of shame. Mr. Miller looked up as I approached. He looked tired, the kind of deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from watching a family legacy dissolve. "We are not hiring," he said, before I could even open my mouth. "I know," I said. I set my laptop on the counter, right next to a tray of monkfish. "I am not here for a job. I am here to make you a deal." He blinked, confused. A deal? I opened my laptop. I had already mocked up a landing page for his store. It was clean, mobile responsive, and integrated with a pre-order system for the weekend rush. I pointed to the screen. "You are losing 40% of your potential revenue because nobody under the age of 40 knows you exist. The tourists go to the chain restaurant down the street because they can see the menu online. I can fix this." "Mr. Miller laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I cannot afford a consultant. Miss, I can barely afford the ice for this fish." "I do not want your money," I said. "Not yet." I looked him in the eye. "I will work for you for 30 days, completely free. I will build the site. I will set up the local search optimization, and I will run a targeted ad campaign on a budget of $100, which I will pay for myself. If your revenue does not increase by at least 20% by the end of the month, you owe me nothing. I walk away, and you keep the work." He narrowed his eyes. "And if it does increase?" "Then you write me a check for $2,000, and you write a letter of recommendation detailing exactly what I did for you." He looked at the screen, then at me. "Why would you do that?" "Because I need the case study." I said honestly, "And you need a miracle." He agreed. He had nothing left to lose. For the next 30 days, I barely slept. I treated Miller's Seafood Market like it was a Fortune 500 company. I photographed every fish. I wrote copy that made the daily catch sound like a culinary event. I targeted geofenced ads to tourists within a 5-mile radius, specifically hitting people searching for dinner ideas between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. I analyzed the inventory flow, I told him to stop ordering swordfish on Thursdays because the data showed it did not sell until Saturday, by which time it looked tired. I reorganized his display case based on color theory and price points. By day 14, the bell on the door was ringing so often it gave Mr. Miller a headache. By day 25, he had to hire 2 part-time college kids to handle the weekend rush. On day 30, I walked in with my final report. I did not have to say a word. Elias Miller was already writing the check. He handed it to me with a hand that was shaking slightly. It was for $2,500. He included a bonus. "You saved us," he said quietly. I took the check. I did not cry. I did not celebrate. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settling in my chest. It was the proof of concept. But the check was not the most valuable thing he gave me. It was the introduction. Elias Miller had a brother-in-law who owned a chain of 5 hardware stores in the Tri-County area. He called him while I was standing there. 2 days later, I had a contract for $10,000 to overhaul their inventory management system. I moved off Becca's sofa 3 weeks later. I rented a studio apartment the size of a closet, but it had a door I could lock and a desk that belonged to me. I needed a legal entity. I sat at my small desk, staring at the incorporation paperwork. I needed a name. I could have chosen something abstract, Blue Ocean Strategy, Apex Consulting, something that hid who I was. But hiding felt like shame, and I was done with shame. I wrote it out in black ink. Keene & Co. Strategy. It was a flag planted in the ground. My parents, Victor and Diane, had spent their lives insisting that the Keene name meant old money, social graces, and decorative women. They used the name as a shield. I was going to use it as a sword. I was going to prove that a Keene could actually build something, not just inherit it. I was going to redefine what the name meant in the business registry of Florida. When people searched for Keene, I did not want them to find my father's failing construction supply firm. I wanted them to find me. I filed the paperwork. I was the CEO, the janitor, and the entire workforce. As the contracts grew, so did the workload. I hired my first employee 4 months later. His name was David, a quiet data analyst who had been let go from an insurance firm for being too meticulous. He was perfect. We worked out of my studio apartment, sitting back to back. I established a strict policy of privacy. I did not give interviews. I did not put my face on the website. My email signature was simply M. Keene. In the business world of Port Rowan, I became a bit of a ghost story. Companies hired Ma Keene when they were bleeding. They hired Ma Keene when they needed someone to come in, look at the ugly truth of their numbers, and cut the rot out without mercy. I was efficient, I was expensive, and I was invisible. It was around the 6-month mark that the emails started. They came to the general inquiry inbox. The sender name was encrypted, a string of random characters that changed every time. The first one was simple. Subject: regarding the Miller case study. Body: you optimized the inventory turnover, but did you account for the seasonal fluctuation in shellfish pricing in the Q3 projection? If you shift the supplier contracts to a floating rate, you could squeeze another 4% out of the margin. I stared at the screen. It was not spam. It was not a client complaint. It was a peer review. And they were right. I replied, "Who is this?" The answer came 2 hours later. "Just an admirer of clean data. You missed a spot on the hardware store logistics. Check the fuel surcharge clauses." I checked. I had missed it. Over the next year, the anonymous emailer became a silent partner in my head. They never asked for money. They never asked to meet. They simply sent short, sharp critiques of my public work, or sophisticated questions about market trends that only an insider would know. It was unnerving. It felt like being watched. But for the first time in my life, the person watching me was not judging my outfit or my marriage prospects. They were judging my competence. And they seemed to think I was worth the effort of correcting. I funneled every cent of profit back into the business. I bought better software. I moved us into a real office, a small suite in a business park near the airport. It was ugly, industrial, and perfect. I stopped waitressing, but I kept the mindset. I worked like I was one spilled drink away from being fired. One night, sitting in my new office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in flowcharts, I looked up my father's company. The stock was down. There were rumors of layoffs. I looked at my own accounts. The Freedom Fund had grown from $0 to $40,000. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to buy a very nice suit. And it was enough to ensure that if I ever walked into a room with my family again, I would not be the one begging for a seat at the table. I was building my own table, and I was bolting it to the floor. The emails changed tone exactly 14 months after I started Keene & Company. For over a year, my anonymous correspondent had been a strict professional mentor, a ghost in the machine who critiqued my spreadsheets and refined my algorithms. We had a rhythm. I would post a case study on my site, and within 6 hours, I would receive a breakdown of my methodology. It was clean, impersonal, and incredibly valuable. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in November, the barrier broke. I had just secured a contract with a mid-sized logistics firm in Jacksonville. It was a good day. I was celebrating with a cup of black tea and a review of the quarterly tax filings. My laptop pinged. Subject: You are looking in the wrong direction. I opened it, expecting a critique of my latest blog post about inventory management. Instead, I found a single paragraph that made the hair on my arms stand up. You are building a reputation based on forensic analysis of failing businesses. It is ironic that you have not applied that same lens to the merger that financed your exit. The Halford accounts are not what they seem. Check the UCC filings in Fulton County for Halford Textiles. Then check the cross-collateralization agreements for the wedding venue. You were not sold for a fortune. You were sold for a credit line extension. I sat there for a long time, the tea turning cold on my desk. This was not a random tip. This was someone who had access to the Halford family's private banking data. The language, cross-collateralization, UCC filings, screamed banking compliance or legal processing. I replied with 2 words: Who are you? The response came 4 minutes later. I am a legal assistant at the regional bank handling the Halford portfolio. I process the loan renewals, and I saw what your parents signed to co-sign that wedding loan. Do not reply to this email again. I did not reply. I did not need to. The key had been turned in the lock. I spent the next 48 hours doing something I had sworn never to do. I looked back, but I did not look back with nostalgia. I looked back with the cold, hard gaze of an auditor. I pulled the public records for Fulton County. It cost me $12.50 to access the digital archives. I downloaded the lien filings for Halford Textiles. The screen filled with red flags. Graham Halford, the golden boy, the heir apparent, was practically drowning. The family business had been leveraged 3 separate times in the last 5 years. The wealth that my mother Diane worshipped was nothing more than a series of bridge loans and refinancing agreements. Then I found the wedding documents. My stomach churned, not from sadness, but from a sickening clarity. The wedding of the century, the event that required my $25,000, had been a performance piece. It was a show of strength designed to convince the bank that the Halford family was still solvent. Look at this lavish party. Look at this social capital. Surely, we are good for the loan. And my parents? They were not just contributors. I found a document dated 3 weeks before the wedding. It was a guarantee agreement. Victor Keene had pledged a portion of his own company's assets to secure the venue deposit, likely because the Halfords had maxed out their credit limit. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark office. My mother had told me I was selfish. She had told me I had to sacrifice for the family's future. But there was no future. It was a Ponzi scheme of social status. They had taken my money not to build something, but to patch a hole in a sinking ship that was taking on water faster than they could bail it out. I could have called Sloan. I could have sent her the PDF files and screamed, "Look who you married." I could have called my father and asked him why he bet his own company on a man who was broke. I did neither. Intervention is for people who believe they can change the outcome. I knew better. The crash was inevitable. If I warned them, they would shoot the messenger. They would call me jealous. They would say I was trying to ruin their happiness. So I did the only thing that made sense to me. I opened a new encrypted folder on my secure server. I named it Project K. I began to archive everything. Every time a new lien was filed against the Halfords, I saved it. Every time my father's company, Keen Group, missed a filing deadline or changed officers, I saved it. I tracked the sale of a plot of land my grandmother had owned, which Victor sold 6 months after I left. I tracked the refinancing of my childhood home. I became a silent historian of their decline. I was not causing it. I was just watching the weather report for the hurricane that was coming. Meanwhile, Keen and Company strategy was no longer a one-woman show operating out of a studio apartment. The work I had done for the hardware chain had attracted attention. Real attention. A regional vice president for a massive retail conglomerate called North End Retail saw what I did with the inventory turnaround. He flew down to Port Rowan to meet me. We met in a rented conference room because my actual office was still too small to hold his team. He was a no-nonsense man named Marcus, and he put a contract on the table that was worth $400,000 a year. We have 18 locations in the southeast that are bleeding operational costs. He said, "Fix them." I read the contract. I picked up my pen. "I can fix them." I said, "But I want a performance clause. If I cut your operational waste by more than 15%, I want 2% of the savings for the first 3 years. Marcus laughed. He thought I was arrogant. "You are gambling on yourself?" "I am not gambling." I said, "I have done the math." He signed. 6 months later, North End Retail was running leaner and faster than they had in a decade. I earned that bonus, and with that capital, I stopped renting conference rooms. I bought a building. It was not the skyscraper I have now, but it was a solid, 3-story structure in the business district of Port Rowan. I put the Keen and Company logo on the glass doors. I hired a team of 12 analysts, 2 forensic accountants, and a dedicated IT specialist. We expanded beyond simple consulting. We started doing operational restructuring and e-commerce integration. We became the people you called when you wanted to survive a recession. But the most important purchase I made was not the building. It was a portfolio transaction that nobody noticed. I used a shell company to buy a small, 0.5% stake in a private equity fund based in Atlanta called Southern Horizon Capital. It was a boring, safe investment on paper, but I did not buy it for the dividends. I bought it because Southern Horizon Capital was the primary debt holder for small industrial businesses in Georgia, and as a shareholder, even a small one, I had the right to request specific quarterly performance reports on the fund's distressed assets. The first report arrived in a thick envelope. I scanned the list of at-risk assets. There it was, Keen Construction Supply, and right below it, Halford Textile Mills. They were packaged together in a bundle of bad debt. My father and my brother-in-law were not just failing, they were failing in the same bucket. This information was power. It meant I did not have to guess when they would come for me. I could see the timeline. I could see the interest payments they were missing. I knew exactly when the water would reach their necks. With this knowledge came a new paranoia. If they were desperate, they would be dangerous. Desperate people do not respect boundaries. They do not respect laws. I needed a wall. I posted a job listing for a head of corporate security. I did not want a mall cop. I wanted a professional. Calvin walked into my office 3 days later. He was wearing a suit that was 10 years old, but pressed to military standards. He had a resume that listed 20 years in the military police and 5 years in high-threat private security. He sat down in the chair opposite my desk and did not fidget. "Why do you want to work here?" I asked. "We are a consulting firm." "Calvin, we look at spreadsheets. It is not exactly high risk." Calvin looked at me. His eyes were dark and observant. "You are a woman running a multi-million-dollar firm in a city full of old boys clubs, and you have a look in your eye. Ms. Keen." "What look is that?" "The look of someone who is expecting a war," he said. I hired him on the spot. I gave Calvin a blank check to overhaul the security of the building. We installed biometric scanners at the employee entrance. We put in high-definition cameras with audio capability in every public area, including the lobby and the conference rooms. We set up a visitor management system that required a government-issued ID and a pre-approved appointment code for anyone trying to get past the reception desk. My staff thought I was being paranoid. They joked that I was building Fort Knox to protect Excel spreadsheets. I did not correct them. One afternoon, Calvin came into my office to review the new protocols. "So just to be clear," he said, tapping his clipboard, "no walk-ins, not even VIPs, not even vendors." "No one," I said. "What if they claim to know you?" Calvin asked. "What if they say they are family?" I looked up from my monitor. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the floor of my office. "Especially if they say they are family," I said. Calvin held my gaze for a moment, assessing the order. He did not ask why. He did not ask for a backstory. He just nodded. "Understood," he said. "If they are not on the list, they do not get in." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "You know, Ms. Keene," he said quietly, "a system is only as good as the person running it. If you ever waver, the whole thing falls apart." "I will not waver," I said, and I meant it. I had built a company, I had built a reputation, and now I had built a fortress. Inside these walls, the chaotic emotional manipulation of the Keene family could not touch me. Here, facts mattered, contracts mattered. I was ready. I just had to wait for them to run out of money. And according to the report from Southern Horizon Capital sitting in my locked drawer, that day was coming a lot sooner than they thought. Time is a funny thing. It can be a healer, or it can be a slow-acting poison. For the Keene family in Red Hollow, time had been the latter. 8 years had passed since I drove my Honda Civic into the Florida sunrise. In that time, Keene and Company had shed its skin. We were no longer a scrappy startup operating out of a studio apartment. We were Keene Holdings. We occupied the top 4 floors of the Pierpoint building in Port Rowan. We had 312 full-time employees. We had satellite offices in Atlanta and Charlotte. We were the gold standard for operational restructuring in the Southeast. My name, or rather, the entity known as M. Keene, had become a sort of urban legend in the regional business community. I was the fixer. I was the one you called when your margins were bleeding and your board of directors was panicking. I had built a reputation on absolute discretion and ruthless efficiency. But while I was climbing, my family was sliding. Thanks to my access to the Southern Horizon Capital reports, I watched their slow, agonizing descent like a car crash in super slow motion. My father, Victor, was a man who believed that a handshake was better than a contract and that computers were a fad. He refused to digitize his inventory. He refused to automate his supply chain. In a world that moved at the speed of fiber optics, Keene Construction Supply was moving at the speed of a fax machine. His clients, big developers who needed real-time data, had started dropping him one by one. And then there was Sloane. My beautiful sister, the golden child, had learned the hard way that marrying for status is like buying a house on a sinkhole. Graham Halford was not just broke. He was reckless. The rumors in the banking circles were that Graham had developed a taste for high-stakes poker and bad real estate deals. Sloane had separated from him 6 months ago. She hadn't filed for divorce. That would be too public, too shameful. But she was living back in my parents' guest house. I knew this because I had a Google alert set for her name. I saw the photos from the society pages. The smiles were still there, but they were brittle. Her eyes, once bright with the certainty of her own superiority, now looked tired. She was 33 years old, but in the harsh light of the paparazzi flashes, she looked 50. They were drowning, and like all drowning people, they were flailing for a life raft. That was how they found me, or rather, that was how they found M. Keene. My mother, Diane, moved in circles where gossip was the primary currency. She must have heard the name at a country club lunch or a charity gala. Someone must have whispered that there was a miracle worker in Port Rowan who could turn around failing businesses and attract investors. Diane would have latched onto that. She wouldn't have cared about the details. She only would have heard money, and salvation. She had no idea that Amity Keene was the daughter she had disowned for $28,000. I knew they were coming before they even left Georgia. My executive assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, had flagged a bizarre voicemail on the general line 2 days prior. "This is Diane Keene, representing the Halford Keene interests. We are coming to Port Rowan to discuss a strategic partnership with your director. We will be there on Tuesday." They didn't ask for a meeting. They announced their arrival. It was classic Diane. She believed the world was waiting for her. I could have told security to bar them at the door. I could have told Leo to email them a rejection. But I didn't. I let them come. I stood on the mezzanine level of the lobby, hidden behind the frosted glass railing, and watched them walk in. It was pathetic, and it was fascinating. Diane was wearing a Chanel suit that I recognized from 8 years ago. It had been dry cleaned too many times. The fabric was starting to sheen in the wrong way. She walked with her chin up, but there was a frantic energy to her movements. She wasn't striding with power anymore. She was marching with desperation. Sloane trailed behind her. She was wearing sunglasses indoors. When she took them off to scan the room, I saw the dark circles she hadn't managed to cover with concealer. She looked fragile. She was gripping her purse like it contained the last of her oxygen. They approached the reception desk with the entitlement of people who have never been told no. I checked in with Calvin via my earpiece. "They are here." "Copy that, Ms. Keene," Calvin replied. "Standard protocol?" "Standard protocol," I said. "No exceptions." I walked down the side stairs, emerging into the lobby just as Diane began to raise her voice. I was not the girl who had left Red Hollow. That girl wore oversized sweaters to hide her body and apologized for taking up space. That girl had long, frizzy hair that she didn't know how to style. The woman who walked across the marble floor of Keene Holdings was different. I wore a tailored linen suit that cost more than my first car. My hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed my face. I moved with the easy, fluid confidence of a predator walking through its own territory. I approached the desk just as Diane slammed her hand down. "I am telling you, we are investors," Diane was shouting at Renee. "We do not fill out visitor logs." I stepped into her peripheral vision. "Is there a problem here?" I asked. Diane spun around. Her eyes swept over me. And she didn't see me. It was a moment of profound, jarring disconnect. She looked right at my face. The same eyes, the same nose, the same mouth she had looked at for 23 years. And she saw a stranger. She saw a woman in a business suit. She saw an obstacle. She saw an employee. Her brain simply refused to process the data. In Diane's world, Mallory Keene was a failure. Mallory Keene was a waitress. Mallory Keene was likely living in a trailer somewhere. The idea that the polished, commanding woman standing in front of her could be her discarded daughter was so impossible, so violative of her worldview, that she blinded herself to it. "Yes, there is a problem," Diane snapped at me, dismissing me instantly. "This receptionist is incompetent. We are here to see M. Keene. We are family friends, and we are being treated like delivery people." I looked at Sloane. Sloane was staring at me, her brow furrowed. She tilted her head slightly. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a sense of familiarity. Maybe it was the way I held my hands. Maybe it was the arch of my eyebrow. "Ma," Sloane started, her voice low and raspy. "Mom, wait." Sloane took a step toward me, squinting. Do I know you?" For a second, the air in the lobby went still. If Sloane said my name, the game would change. But Diane was not interested in Sloane's intuition. She was interested in dominance. She cut Sloane off with a sharp chop of her hand. "Sloane, stop it. Do not talk to the staff. It just encourages them to be familiar." Diane turned back to me, her face twisted in a sneer. "Are you the manager?" she demanded. "If you are, you need to retrain your front desk. We are here to offer a partnership that will save this company from obscurity. We are the Keene family from Red Hollow." The irony was so thick I could taste it. She was using my own name. the name I had built into an empire, to try and intimidate me in my own lobby. "I am afraid that implies you have an appointment," I said coolly. "And according to our system, you do not." "I do not need an appointment," Diane shrieked. The veneer of the socialite was cracking, revealing the panicked, debt-ridden woman beneath. "I am a VIP. Do you hear me? I am a very important person." She was hysterical. She was terrified. She was loud. And she still had no idea who she was talking to. "Security!" she yelled, pointing a finger at my chest. "Security, escort this woman out. She doesn't work here. She's blocking me." I looked at Calvin, who had stepped up behind her. I saw the muscle in his jaw jump. Diane thought she was ordering a servant to remove a nuisance. She thought she was asserting her natural-born right to rule the room. She was about to find out that in this building, the only royalty was the one signing the paychecks, and she was standing on my floor. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. "Security, escort this woman out. She does not work here." My mother, Diane Keene, stood with her arm extended, her finger pointing at my chest. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving beneath the cream silk of her blouse. She looked triumphant, as if issuing this command was the natural order of the universe, and the universe was obligated to obey. I looked at Calvin. Calvin did not move toward me. He did not reach for my arm. He did not even blink. He shifted his weight, the leather of his utility belt creaking softly in the silence. He turned his body so that he was fully facing Diane, blocking her path to the elevators with the sheer wall of his physical presence. "I am waiting," Diane snapped, her voice rising an octave. "Did you not hear me? I said remove her. She is harassing a potential investor." "Ma'am," Calvin said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "I heard you, but as I stated, I cannot process any requests until I have verified your identity." Diane let out a sound of pure exasperation. "This is ridiculous. I told you who I am. I am Diane Keene." She gestured wildly at the glass doors, at the branding on the wall behind the reception desk. "Keene," she enunciated, as if speaking to a child. Keane, as in, the name on the side of this building. I am the matriarch of this family. Now, unless you want to be fired for insubordination, you will step aside and let us pass." She really believed it. She believed that the 4 letters of our last name were a magic spell that suspended the laws of physics and corporate policy. She thought that because my father, Victor, ran his company like a fiefdom where his mood dictated the rules, the rest of the world operated the same way. Calvin pulled a small notepad from his pocket. He did not look impressed. "Ma'am, having the same last name as the holding company does not grant you access to secure floors," he said. "We have 300 employees here. 7 of them are named Smith. That does not mean they own the Smithsonian. I need a government-issued photo ID, driver's license or passport." Sloane winced. She looked down at her shoes, mortified. "Mom, just give him the ID," she whispered. "Be quiet." "Sloane," Diane hissed. She rummaged aggressively in her purse, the expensive leather snapping as she yanked it open. She pulled out her driver's license and practically threw it at Calvin. "Fine," she spat. "Here, satisfied? Now get this, person, out of my sight." She waved a dismissive hand at me. I was still standing there, calm, silent, watching the scene unfold with the detached focus of a surgeon observing a bleed. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Calvin took the ID. He walked over to the reception desk and handed it to Renee. "Run it," he said. Renee took the card. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she knew her job. She placed the card on the scanner. I watched the monitor from the reflection in the glass partition. I knew the code that was written there. I had written it myself 5 years ago, late at night, when I was designing the threat assessment protocols for the building. Most companies have a blacklist. They have a do not admit file for disgruntled ex-employees or stalkers. I had created a different category. I called it the gray list. The screen on Renee's desk flashed. It was not red, which would have triggered a silent alarm. It was a pulsing amber. Renee stared at the screen. She blinked. She looked up at Calvin, then at me. I gave her the slightest nod. Follow the script. Ms. Keene, Renee said, her voice steadying. She was addressing Diane, but the title hung in the air, ambiguous. Diane preened, straightening her jacket. Finally, which floor is the executive suite? We are wasting time. Renee looked at the monitor, reading the text box that had just popped up. Ma'am, the system has flagged you as a priority 2 guest, Renee said. Diane's smile returned, sharp and satisfied. She shot a look of pure venom in my direction. See? Priority. That sounds correct. However, Renee continued, ignoring the interruption, the protocol for priority 2 guests requires a security escort to a specific location. You are not cleared for the executive penthouse. Diane's smile faltered. Excuse me? I am here to see M. Keene. Yes, ma'am, Renee said. And M. Keene's standing orders are that all unsolicited family representatives are to be directed to conference room B12 for legal intake. Legal intake? Diane repeated, the word tasting sour in her mouth. We are not here for legal. We are here for a strategic partnership. Renee shrugged apologetically. I am just following the prompts on the screen. Ma'am, the system is automated. It recognizes your credentials and has assigned the appropriate room. If you want to see the director, that is where you have to go. Diane stood there, processing this. She was torn. On one hand, she was being told to go to a secondary room. On the other hand, she was being allowed in. In her mind, the door was opening. She assumed that once she was inside, she could charm or bully her way up the ladder. She assumed room B12 was just a waiting area for VIPs. She grabbed her license back from the counter. Fine, she said haughtily. Room B12. We will wait there. But tell M. Keene that I am not a patient woman. She turned to me one last time. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple linen trousers and my messy hair. And you? She sneered. I hope you enjoyed your little power trip. When I'm done with my meeting, I am going to make sure Human Resources knows exactly how rude you were to the mother of the CEO. You might want to start updating your resume. I looked at her. The urge to laugh was a physical pressure in my chest, but I held it back. The camera above us was recording every pixel of her arrogance, every threat, every delusion. I think Human Resources will be very interested in this interaction, I said softly. Diane laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Goodbye, nobody. She turned on her heel and marched toward the elevator bank, Sloane trailing behind her like a prisoner of war. Calvin stepped forward. He pressed the call button for them. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ping. It was the service elevator, the one we used for freight and large deliveries, though it was clean enough that visitors rarely noticed the difference. It was programmed to skip the executive floors entirely. Diane stepped in, her head held high. She pressed the button for the 12th floor, assuming that was where the power lived. The doors began to slide shut. Through the narrowing gap, I saw my mother's face. She was checking her reflection in the mirrored wall of the elevator, adjusting her hair, preparing to manipulate whoever she found upstairs. She looked confident. She looked like she had already won. The doors clicked shut. The silence that rushed back into the lobby was absolute. Renee let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. She slumped slightly in her chair. Oh my God, she whispered. Ms. Keene, Mallory, was that really her? I walked over to the desk. I placed my hand on the cool marble counter. Yes, I said, that was her. Calvin walked back from the elevators. He stood next to me, checking his watch. They are in the car, he said. The system is routing them directly to the legal wing on the 2nd floor. They cannot access the main elevators from there. They are effectively contained. I nodded. Good work, Calvin. He looked at me, his expression serious. You know what she's going to do when she realizes she is not in the penthouse, right? She is going to scream the paint off the walls. I know, I said. I adjusted the strap of my bag. I smoothed the front of my shirt. Are you going up? Renee asked. I looked at the digital display above the elevator. The numbers were ticking up. 1, 2. Yes, I said, but not yet. Let them sit in the room for a few minutes. Let them look at the walls. Let them realize that there is no champagne, no plush armchairs, and no view of the ocean. I walked toward the main executive elevator, the one that required a biometric scan of my retina to open. Conference room B12 was not a dungeon, but it was stark. It was designed for depositions. It had a long glass table, uncomfortable ergonomic chairs, and acoustic paneling that absorbed sound so completely it made the room feel dead. There were no windows, just cold, artificial light. It was the room we used when we fired people for cause. I stepped into my private elevator. The scanner flashed green, recognizing me instantly. "Welcome back, Ms. Keene," the automated voice said. I leaned back against the wall of the elevator as it began to rise. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the final act. Diane thought she had just walked past a rude employee to get to the throne room. She thought she had dismissed me. She had no idea that she had just voluntarily walked into a cage, and I was the one holding the key. I checked my phone. I sent a single text message to my general counsel, who was waiting on the second floor. Message: "The package has been delivered. Start the recording." The elevator pinged. I stepped out onto the executive floor, but I did not go to my office. I went to the stairwell. I was going down to the second floor. I wanted to walk in on my own 2 feet. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Now, it was time to close the door. Conference room B12 was designed to make people feel small. The walls were a matte charcoal gray. The lighting was cool and clinical, and the air was recycled so aggressively it felt thin in the lungs. There were no windows to the outside world, only a single, large monitor mounted on the far wall. I stood outside the heavy oak door for a moment, listening. The soundproofing was excellent, but Diane Keene's voice had a frequency that could penetrate lead. "I demand to speak to the person in charge," she was shouting. "This is unlawful detention. You cannot just leave us in a room without refreshments." I signaled to Jonas, my general counsel. He was standing by the door, adjusting his tie. He was a man of few words and even fewer smiles, which made him perfect for legal intake. "Go," I whispered. Jonas nodded and opened the door. He stepped inside, but he did not invite them to sit. He walked to the far end of the long glass table and tapped a command into the control console. I slipped in behind him, staying in the shadows near the doorframe, silent and unobserved. Inside the room, Diane and Sloane were standing. Diane looked furious, her chest heaving, her face flushed a blotchy red. Sloane looked terrified, hugging her purse to her stomach as if it were a life vest. "Who are you?" Diane snapped at Jonas. "Are you the assistant? Get me Keene, now." Jonas did not answer. He simply pointed at the large monitor on the wall. The screen flickered to life. It was a high-definition video feed. Time-stamped 3 minutes ago, the audio was crystal clear. "Security, escort this woman out. She does not work here. She is a nobody." It was Diane's voice, booming through the surround sound speakers of the conference room. On the screen, her face was twisted in arrogance, her finger pointing at the woman in the linen trousers, me, with absolute disdain. Diane went silent. She stared at the screen, watching herself abuse the staff, watching herself demand the removal of an employee. The video ended. The screen went black. Jonas placed a file folder on the table. The sound of the paper hitting the glass was sharp, like a gavel. "Ms. Keene," Jonas said, his voice level and professional. "My name is Jonas Reed, General Counsel for Keene Holdings. Before we proceed with any business discussions, we need to address the footage we just viewed. You entered our secure facility and attempted to command our security personnel to remove a member of our staff. You also utilized abusive language in a public area." Diane sputtered. That is irrelevant. That was just some rude girl in the lobby. I am here to see the owner. I am here to see him, Keene." Jonas looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "You are seeing Keene," he said. Diane blinked. What? No, I am not. I am looking at a lawyer. I want the director, the CEO, the person who built this place. I stepped out of the shadows. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the room. I walked toward the table. I did not look at Diane. I did not look at Sloane. I walked to the head of the table, the seat of power, where a digital sign-in pad was waiting. I picked up the stylus. The scratching sound it made against the tablet was the only noise in the room. I wrote my name in bold, looping cursive, Mallory Keene. Then I selected the title from the drop-down menu, Founder and CEO. I hit Enter. The screen behind me flashed again. This time, it displayed the company organizational chart. At the very top, accompanied by a professional headshot taken last year, was my name. I turned around. Hello. Mother, I said. The reaction was visceral. Sloane let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She brought her hands up to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from the screen to me, putting the pieces together. The linen suit, the confidence, the deference of the staff. Mallory? She whispered. Oh my God, Mallory. Diane did not cry. She went completely pale. It was as if someone had opened a valve in her feet and drained all the blood from her body. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for a trapdoor, looking for a camera, looking for anything that would make this not be true. You? Diane breathed. It cannot be. You work here? I do not just work here, Diane, I said, my voice calm and devoid of warmth. I own the building. I own the servers. I own the security team you tried to weaponize against me. And I own the company you are currently begging for a meeting with. Diane shook her head. A jerky, mechanical motion. No, that is impossible. You left. You had nothing. You are just Mallory. I am M. Keene, I corrected her. The M stands for Mallory. It always has. I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water. I did not offer them any. Sloane sank into a chair, her legs giving out. You built this? She asked, her voice trembling. All of this? The terrifying reputation? The turnaround strategies? That was you? I took a sip of water, yes. Diane's shock began to morph. I watched it happen in real time. Her brain, desperate to salvage her ego, began to rewrite the narrative. She straightened her spine. She forced a smile onto her face, though it looked like a rictus of pain. Well, she said, her voice shaking but gaining volume. Well, this is a surprise. She took a step toward me, opening her arms as if to embrace me. Mallory, darling, why didn't you say something? My goodness, look at you. We have been so worried. We have missed you so much. And to think, you have been here the whole time, building all of this? Success. She was trying to hug me. She was trying to physically bridge the 8-year gap and the $28,000 she had stolen, simply by acting like a proud mother. I raised my hand. Stop. Diane froze. Do not come any closer, I said, and do not insult my intelligence by pretending you are here for a reunion. Diane lowered her arms, looking hurt. How can you say that? We are family. We are your blood. We are proud of you. Mallory, your father. Your father will be so thrilled to hear that you have done so well for yourself. I set the glass down on the table. Proud? I repeated. You just asked security to throw me onto the street because you thought I was a janitor. You called me a nobody less than 10 minutes ago. That was a misunderstanding, Diane cried. I didn't recognize you. You look so different. I leaned forward, placing both hands on the glass table. Let us cut the performance. Diane, I have a meeting in 20 minutes that is actually important, so I'm going to ask you one question, and I want the truth. I looked her dead in the eye. Are you here because you missed your daughter? Or are you here because you are broke? The word broke hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Diane flinched. Broke? Don't be ridiculous. We are liquid. We are just restructuring. Jonas, I said, without looking away from her. The file. Jonas slid a thick black folder across the table. It stopped directly in front of Diane. "Open it," I said. Diane stared at the folder. She did not move. Sloane reached out and flipped it open. It was not a family album. It was a dossier. The first page was a copy of a lawsuit filed 3 days ago by a concrete supplier in Atlanta, suing Keene Construction Supply for $150,000 in unpaid invoices. The second page was a foreclosure notice on a warehouse property. The third page was an email printout, an inquiry sent from a generic Gmail account to a consulting brokerage, asking for emergency turnaround assistance for a distressed family conglomerate. Diane stared at the papers. Her hands started to shake. How do you have these?" she whispered. "These are private corporate records." "Nothing is private when you stop paying your bills," I said. Jonas stepped forward. "We ran a standard due diligence check when your request for a meeting came in through the back channels. We know that Keene Group is currently operating at a 40% deficit. We know that the bank has frozen your credit lines, and we know that you are here because no legitimate investor will touch you." I walked around the table until I was standing right next to Sloane. She smelled like expensive perfume and fear. "You didn't come here to partner with Keene," I said softly. "You came here to find a savior. You just didn't expect the savior to be the person you sacrificed to get into this mess." Sloane looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mallory, please. We didn't know. Graham, he ruined everything. He spent money we didn't have. Mom and Dad tried to cover for him. And now you want me to fix it," I finished. Diane found her voice again. It was smaller now, stripped of its arrogance. "You are a Keene," she said, her voice wavering. "This is the family legacy. Your father built that company from the ground up. You cannot let it fail. You have the money. I see it. This building. You have millions. You can write a check and make this go away." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You think this is about money?" I asked. I turned to the corner of the room. There was a man sitting there who had been silent the entire time. He was dressed in a gray suit, blending into the walls. He was in his 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Diane hadn't even noticed him. "I would like to introduce you to Mr. Julian Thorne," I said. Julian stood up. He held a tablet in his hands. "Who is he?" Diane asked, wiping her eyes. "Another lawyer?" "No," I said. "Mr. Thorne is the Chief Compliance Officer for First Regional Bank." Diane's knees gave out. She sank into the chair next to Sloane. First Regional was their bank. It was the bank that held the mortgage on their house, the loans for the business, and the debt for Sloane's wedding. "Mr. Thorne," I said, "would you mind sharing why you are here today?" Julian pushed his glasses up his nose. He looked at Diane with the detached pity of an executioner. "Mrs. Keene," he said, "for the past 6 years, I have been tracking a series of irregularities in the Halford and Keene account ledgers, specifically, the inflation of asset values to secure loans, and the subsequent shifting of funds between personal and business accounts to hide losses." Diane went gray. "I believe you might remember receiving some emails a few years ago." Julian continued, his voice mild. "Anonymous questions about your accounting practices? Queries about why certain inventory numbers didn't match the tax filings?" Diane's eyes widened. She looked at me, then at Julian. "That was you?" she whispered. Julian nodded toward me. "I was the one sending the emails, but I was sending them to Ms. Keene here. She was the one who analyzed the data. She was the one who spotted the patterns." I stepped back into Diane's line of sight. "You see, Mother," I said, "I haven't just been building my company. I have been watching yours. I have seen every fake invoice. I have seen every bridge loan you took out to pay off another loan. I knew you were coming here today before you even packed your bags, because I saw the default notice go out on Monday." Julian cleared his throat. "Technically, Mrs. Keene, what you have done is classified as bank fraud. The only reason the bank hasn't filed criminal charges yet is because we were waiting to see if you had a viable exit strategy. He looked around the cold, gray room. "I assume," he said, "that this meeting was your exit strategy." Diane put her head in her hands. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. The reality was crashing down on her. She wasn't just broke, she was a criminal, and the only person standing between her and a prison cell was the daughter she had thrown away. Sloane looked at me, her face streaked with mascara. "Mallory," she choked out, "please, you have to help us. Dad doesn't know about the fraud. Mom handled the books. If this comes out, it kills him." I looked at my sister. I looked at my mother, who was now weeping silently into her hands, her Chanel suit looking like a costume from a play that had closed years ago. "You asked for Keen," I said. "You wanted the professional. You wanted the fixer." I walked back to the head of the table. I sat down. "Well, you have her, but Keen doesn't work for free. And Keen doesn't bail out bad investments without total control." I opened the leather portfolio in front of me. "If you want to leave this room without Mr. Thorne calling the authorities," I said, my voice hard as diamond, "we are going to do things my way, and my way starts with a complete and total surrender." Diane looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with fear. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Everything," I said. The silence that followed my demand for everything was thick enough to choke on. For a few seconds, the only sound in conference room B12 was the hum of the air filtration system and the soft, terrified breathing of my sister, Sloane. Diane sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. I watched the gears turning behind her eyes. I could see the exact moment she decided to pivot. She was a survivor. I would give her that. She was like a cockroach in a nuclear winter. She would adapt to anything if it meant she could keep her status. She took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her skirt, and looked at me. The tears were gone. In their place was a brittle, calculated warmth. "Mallory," she said, her voice dropping into a register that was meant to sound reasonable, even maternal. "Let us take a step back. I think we have gotten off on the wrong foot. The stress? Well, you know how stress affects judgment." She gestured around the room, encompassing Julian Thorne and Jonas Reed in her sweep. "We do not need to make this adversarial," she continued, a smile straining at the corners of her mouth. "You have built a magnificent system here. Truly, I am impressed. And your father? Well, Victor has the legacy. He has the contacts in the industry that go back 40 years. He has the name recognition." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a sudden, manic idea. "Think about it, darling," she said. "A merger. The Keen Group and Keen Holdings. Tradition meets innovation. We could brand it as a family reunion of titans. The return of the daughter. The press would eat it up. It would restore confidence in the market immediately. We combine our assets. Your father stays on as chairman emeritus to save face, and you get to come home." She sat back, looking pleased with herself. She actually believed she was offering me a gift. She thought that allowing me to bail them out was a privilege. I looked at Jonas. He was staring at the ceiling, trying to hide his disbelief. I looked at Julian. He was polishing his glasses, looking bored. Then I looked at Diane. "You want a merger," I stated flatly. "A strategic alliance," Diane corrected. "We bring the history, you bring the capital. It is a win-win." I picked up the stylus again and tapped it rhythmically against the glass table. "Let me explain how business works. Diane," I said, "a merger implies that both parties bring value to the table. You are not bringing value. You are bringing debt, legal liability, and a brand that is currently synonymous with late payments and potential fraud." Diane stiffened. "That is harsh." "That is the market," I replied. "I do not buy stories. I buy assets. And right now, your assets are toxic." I opened the folder Jonas had placed in front of me. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a standard term sheet I had drafted the moment I saw the alert that they were in the building. "I am not going to merge with you," I said, "and I am not going to give you a loan." Sloane made a small, whimpering sound. Then what? I am going to offer you a consulting agreement, I said. Keene Holdings will step in as an external restructuring agent. We will guarantee the immediate bridge loan required to stop the bank from foreclosing on your house and the main warehouse. Diane exhaled, her shoulders dropping. Oh, thank God. I knew you would not let us down. I am not finished, I cut in, my voice sharp. Diane froze. In exchange for this liquidity, I said, reading from the sheet, I require 3 things. First, an independent, third-party forensic audit of the Keene Group and all associated family accounts, going back 10 years. No more hiding, no more creative accounting. Every single cent is tracked. Diane's face paled. But some of those records are private. Not anymore, I said. Second, all debt obligations will be made public to the board. We are going to sanitize the books with sunlight. If you owe money to a loan shark or a cousin, it goes on the ledger. I paused, letting the weight of the final condition build. And third, I said, Victor steps down as CEO, effective immediately. He signs a power of attorney granting temporary operational control of the Keene Group to me. I will appoint an interim manager. Victor can keep the title of chairman if it makes him feel better at the country club, but he does not sign checks. He does not hire. He does not fire. He goes fishing. Diane stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. Absolutely not, she cried. You cannot do that. This is his company. He built it with his bare hands. You want to humiliate him. I want to save him from prison, I snapped, my voice finally rising. Do you not understand what Mr. Thorne just told you? You are on the edge of a cliff, Diane. You are not negotiating from a position of strength. You are begging for a parachute. You are punishing us, Diane shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. That is what this is. This is revenge because we didn't support your little website 8 years ago. You are vindictive. I stood up slowly. I walked around the table until I was standing inches from her. I was taller than her now, in my heels and my posture. Punishment? I asked softly. You think this is punishment? I shook my head. If I wanted to punish you, I would have let Mr. Thorne file the police report this afternoon. I would have let the bank seize the house. I would have let you explain to your neighbors why the sheriff was putting padlocks on the gates. I gestured to the folder. This isn't punishment. Mother, this is the one thing you have never given me, and the one thing you have never been willing to look at yourself. It is the truth. I leaned in. You raised me to believe that appearance was everything, that if you looked rich, you were rich, that if you acted happy, you were happy. But the math does not care about your appearance. The numbers do not care about your reputation. I am not punishing you. I am simply forcing you to live in reality for the first time in your life. Diane stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The truth was a foreign concept to her, a language she could not speak. Sloane spoke up. Her voice was barely a whisper. I signed them, she said. We all turned to look at her. Sloane was staring at the table, tears dripping onto the glass. The documents, she said, her voice cracking. The ones for the second mortgage, and the line of credit for the textile mill. Graham brought them to me. He said it was just a formality. He said if I didn't sign them, the employees wouldn't get paid before Christmas. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. He told me not to read them. He said I wouldn't understand the legal jargon. So I signed them. I signed my name. I signed Mom's name on a few because he said she was busy and had authorized it. Julian Thorne let out a soft sigh and made a note on his tablet. That is forgery, Mrs. Halford, Julian said gently, and under the law, since you benefited from the proceeds, it makes you a co-conspirator. Sloane put her head in her hands and began to sob. I didn't know. I just wanted to keep the peace. I just wanted everything to be okay. I looked at my sister, the golden girl, the one who had been traded for a wedding. She was not a villain. She was a victim of her own passivity. She had been trained to be decorative, to be agreeable, to never ask questions. And that training had led her straight into a bear trap. I know, I said. Sloane looked up. You know? I know about the separation, I said. I know Graham has been living in a hotel in Savannah for 3 months. I know he lost $50,000 at a casino in Biloxi last year. And I know that Keene Construction Supply lost its contract with the Turner Development because Victor refused to install the digital inventory system they required. Diane looked horrified. How? How do you know all of that? We never told anyone. You didn't have to, I said. I have been watching. I have been reading the industry reports. I have been tracking the court filings. I walked back to my chair and picked up the term sheet. Do you remember what you said to me? I asked, looking at Diane. 8 years ago, in the dining room, when I asked for a contract to protect my money. Diane swallowed hard. She remembered. I could see it in her eyes. You told me, I recited, keeping my voice perfectly even, that if I did not support the family, I could figure it out on my own. You told me to self-fund my life. I held up the term sheet. Well, now I am telling you to figure it out. But unlike you, I am offering a lifeline. I am offering you a way to survive. But you have to do it on my terms. You have to adapt. You have to change. I slid the paper across the table toward Diane. Take it or leave it, I said. You have 24 hours to get Victor's signature. If I do not have this document back on my desk by 2 o'clock tomorrow, the offer is rescinded, and Mr. Thorne proceeds with his filing. Diane looked at the paper as if it were a radioactive isotope. She reached out a hand, trembling, and touched the corner of the page. Then she looked up at me. Her eyes were swimming with a mixture of fear and a desperate, clawing need for connection. Mallory, she whispered. She stood up and reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. Please, can we just have dinner? Just us? Without the lawyers? We can talk about this like a family. I miss you. I really do. I looked at her hand. Her manicure was chipped. It was the first time I had ever seen Diane Keene with imperfect nails. I did not reach back. I pulled my hand away, tucking it firmly behind my back. No, I said. Diane flinched as if I had slapped her. This is not a family matter anymore, I said. This is a solvency matter. If you have questions about the term sheet, have your attorney call Jonas. I do not want to discuss business over dinner, and I do not want to have dinner with people who only remember my name when they need a check. I turned to Jonas. Escort them out, through the side exit. Diane stood there for a moment longer, her hand still reaching out into the empty air. She looked at me with a profound sense of confusion. She had played her best card, the emotional guilt trip, and it had bounced off me like a pebble against a tank. Come on, Mom, Sloane said softly, standing up and taking Diane's arm. Let's go, please. Sloane took the term sheet. She folded it carefully and put it in her purse. She looked at me one last time. There was no anger in her face, only a deep, exhausted shame. Thank you, Sloane whispered. Diane let herself be led away, but as she reached the door, she turned back. She straightened her spine again, that reflex of arrogance kicking in even as her world burned. You will come around, she said, her voice regaining a hint of its old steel. You are upset right now, but you are a Keene. You will realize that family comes first. You will call me tomorrow, and we will fix this properly. She walked out the door, her heels clicking on the floor, holding on to her delusion as if it were the last life preserver on the Titanic. The door clicked shut. I stood alone in the silence of room B12. I looked at the empty chairs. I looked at the glass of water I hadn't touched. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being dropped after a 10-mile hike. It was relief. I walked over to the wall monitor. I pressed the button for the intercom. Calvin? I am here, Ms. Keene. Calvin's voice came through instantly. They are in the elevator. Jonas is with them. Good, I said. I looked up at the camera lens in the corner of the room. staring directly into the black glass eye. "Update the protocol," I said. "From this moment forward, any contact from the Keene family, Diane, Victor, or Sloan, goes through legal first. No phone calls to my office, no drop-ins, no packages." "Understood," Calvin said. "Full containment." "Full containment," I repeated. "If they want to speak to me, they can make an appointment, like everyone else." I turned off the intercom. I picked up my folder and walked toward the private elevator. I had a company to run, and for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't running it to prove them wrong. I was running it because it was mine. My mother and sister had been gone for less than 20 minutes when the narrative I had constructed began to fall apart. I was sitting in my office, staring at the empty chair where Diane had tried to manipulate me. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the dull ache of validation that comes too late to matter. I had won. I had forced them to bend the knee. I had the term sheet. But my general counsel, Jonas, did not look like a man who had just won a victory. He walked back into the room, holding his tablet with a grip that turned his knuckles white. "We have a discrepancy," Jonas said without preamble. I looked up, rubbing my temples. "I assumed you checked the security logs. Did they try to steal a stapler on the way out?" "This is not about their exit," Jonas said. "It is about their arrival." He placed the tablet in front of me. On the screen was the visitor log for the day. "We assumed Diane and Sloan were walk-ins," Jonas explained. "We assumed they just showed up and tried to bully their way past Renee. That is why the system flagged them as unauthorized. But I just ran a deep scrub of the appointment server." He tapped the screen. There was a calendar entry. It was buried in the tertiary scheduling system, the one we use for vendors and maintenance, not for VIPs. It was created 10 days ago. The entry code was simple, MK. The time slot was for today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I stared at the screen. The code MK was not a random keystroke. It was the shorthand I used on my very first business cards, the ones I had printed at the library when I was living on Becca's sofa. Only 3 people knew that specific stylization: me, Becca, and the family I had left behind. "Who made this?" I asked. "The IP address tracks to a burner phone registered in Red Hollow, Georgia," Jonas said, "but the recovery email attached to the appointment is not Diane's." He swiped to the next page. It was an email address I did not recognize at first. bluehydrangea@gmail.com. But then the memory hit me. Blue hydrangeas. They were the flowers Sloan had insisted on for her bridesmaids. The flowers that had cost $4,000 alone. "It was Sloan," I whispered. "Sloan set this up," Jonas confirmed. "She did not just come here as Diane's silent prop. She orchestrated the timing. She knew they were coming, and she created a digital footprint 10 days in advance to ensure there was a record of their presence." "Why?" I asked. "If she wanted to see me, why not just email me? Why hide it?" "Because she did not want a meeting," Jonas said. "She wanted a Dropbox." He pressed a button. The appointment entry opened up, revealing an encrypted attachment. When Renee scanned Diane's ID downstairs, it triggered the security protocols, Jonas said. But when the system clocked the time, exactly 2 o'clock, it also unlocked this file. It was a dead man's switch. It was set to delete itself if they did not arrive by 2:15. I looked at the file name. It was just a date. August 14th, 2017. That was the date I left home. "Open it," I said. Jonas tapped the screen. The file unzipped. It was a single PDF, high resolution, clearly scanned from an original physical document. I leaned in, the breath trapped in my lungs. It was a bank transfer authorization. The amount was $28,000. The source account was the Keene Family Educational Trust, my grandmother's fund. The destination account was the St. Regis Atlanta Event Services. But it was the bottom of the page that made the room spin. There were 2 signature lines, one for the trustee, my father, Victor, and one for the beneficiary, me. My name was signed in blue ink, Mallory J. Keene. It was a perfect replica of my signature, the loop of the M, the sharp cut of the K. It was so good that for a second, I questioned my own memory. Had I signed it? Had I blacked out from stress and agreed to it? No. I remembered the dining room. I remembered saying no. I remembered driving away. They forged it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They didn't just steal the money. They committed felony wire fraud and identity theft. They forged my signature to bypass the bank's authorization protocols. I looked at the metadata on the scan. And Sloan has had this for 8 years. I looked up at Jonas, and then past him to Julian Thorne, who was standing by the window. Julian was not looking at the tablet. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable. "Why give this to me now?" I asked. "Why confess to a felony that implicates her entire family?" "Because she is not confessing for the sake of her conscience," Julian said quietly. He walked over to the table. "She is confessing because she is being hunted." Julian pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I told you I have been tracking the Halford accounts," Julian said. "Graham Halford is not just a bad gambler. He is a desperate man. 2 weeks ago, he applied for a hard money loan, a shark loan, to cover his casino debts. He listed potential litigation settlement as his collateral." I looked at Julian. "What litigation?" "Yours," Julian said. "Graham found the copy of this forgery. He knows that if this document ever comes to light, the Keene family goes to prison. He told Sloan that if she leaves him, or if she does not help him secure a bailout from you, he will leak this document to the authorities himself. He will claim he had nothing to do with it, that he was just an innocent bystander, and he will send his wife and her parents to jail to save his own skin." I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. "Sloan didn't come here to beg for money for the company. She came here because Graham is holding a gun to her head. She gave me this document because she knows that once I see it, I cannot just write a check." "Exactly," Jonas said. "If you bail out Keene Group now, knowing this fraud exists, you become an accessory after the fact. You become part of the cover-up. Sloan just handed you the one thing that prevents you from saving them. She is cutting the cord." I realized. She is terrified. But she is finally cutting the cord. She would rather see them all go down in flames than let Graham use this to control her for another day. I looked at Julian again. There was something in his posture. He wasn't surprised by the file. He wasn't leaning in to see the signature. "You knew," I said. Julian adjusted his glasses. "You knew she had this," I repeated, my voice hardening. Julian sighed. He sat down in the chair Diane had vacated. 8 years ago," he said, "I was a junior compliance officer. I flagged the transfer because the signature looked practiced. I called the Keene house to verify." A young woman answered the phone. She sounded like she had been crying. "Sloan," I whispered. "She verified the transfer." Julian said, "She lied to me. She said you were right there and had just signed it. But then, she asked me a strange question. She asked, if a transaction is disputed later, does the bank keep the physical paper?" I nodded, and you told her yes. "I told her we keep digital copies for 7 years," Julian said, "but she didn't trust the bank." 2 days later, I received an anonymous envelope at my personal desk. It contained the original carbon copy of the transfer slip, the one with the pressure marks from the pen, and a note that said, "Keep this safe, please." I stared at him. "You have had the original this whole time?" "I have," Julian said. "That is why I started emailing you. That is why I started tracking your career. I knew a crime had been committed against you, but I couldn't prove who sent me the note. I needed to see if you were the kind of person who would eventually come for the truth." He pointed to the screen. "When Sloan set up the appointment 10 days ago, she emailed me. She told me Graham had found her copy. She asked if I still had mine. She told me she was going to bring Diane to you, and that she needed me to be in the room to ensure the evidence reached you." I sat back in my chair. The layers of deception were peeling away, revealing a rot so deep it made my stomach turn. My mother didn't just favor Sloan. My mother committed a federal crime to fund a party. My father signed off on it, and my sister, the golden child, had been living with the knowledge that her wedding was a crime scene for 8 years. And now, they wanted a merger. They wanted to mix their radioactive assets with my clean company. If I sign that term sheet, I said, realizing the trap I had almost walked into, if I take operational control of Keen Group while this fraud is buried in their books, and then Graham leaks it. Then you go down with them, Jonas finished. The SEC would see the merger as an attempt to launder the fraudulent history. You would lose your license. You would lose Keen Holdings. You would lose everything. Graham Halford had set a trap, and Diane, in her arrogance, had marched right into it, dragging me along. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline of Port Rowan. The sun was high and bright, casting sharp shadows on the street below. I could see the logic of it. Diane thought she could charm me. Sloane knew better. Sloane knew that the only way to save me from the blast radius was to show me the bomb. So, Jonas asked quietly, what do we do? The term sheet is void. We cannot touch them. We have to ban them from the premises and let the bank foreclose. No, I said. I turned around. My face was reflected in the glass table, hard and angular. If we walk away, Graham wins. He leaks the document. He destroys Sloane. And he probably cuts a deal for himself. And my mother gets to play the victim one last time. I walked back to the table and placed my hand on the tablet, covering the image of the forged signature. We are not walking away, I said. We are going to finish this, but we are not going to do it in a private conference room. I looked at Julian. You still have the original carbon copy? It is in a safety deposit box at First Regional, Julian said. Get it, I said. I looked at Jonas. Draft a new document, I said. Not a term sheet. I want a notice of a mandatory emergency shareholder meeting for the Keen Group. As the holder of the debt via Southern Horizon Capital, I have the right to call it. But you said you wouldn't merge, Jonas said, confused. I am not merging. I said, I am auditing. I paced the length of the room, the plan forming in my mind like a complex architectural drawing. We are going to invite everyone, I said, the board of directors, the primary creditors, the key investors, and the Keen family. We are going to tell them that M. Keen is ready to present the strategic alliance that Diane wanted. Diane will think she won, Jonas said. She will think you caved. Exactly, I said. She will walk into that room expecting a coronation. She will bring Victor. She will bring Sloane. And she will probably even bring Graham, because she will want to show off the new partnership. And then? Julian asked. And then? I said, my voice dropping to a register that was colder than the air conditioning. We are going to put the truth on the projector. We are going to play the video from the lobby. We are going to show the foreclosure notices, and we are going to show this signature. I looked at the two men. We are not going to save the Keen Group. We are going to dissect it, publicly, legally, and permanently. I checked my watch. It was 3:30. Call the meeting for Friday morning. I said, tell them it is a closed session for the execution of the partnership agreement. I picked up the stylus and closed the file on the tablet. My mother wanted to escort a stranger out of her building. On Friday, I am going to show her exactly who owns the house. Friday morning arrived with the kind of brilliant, blinding sunshine that usually signals a new beginning. For my mother, Diane Keen, I imagined she saw it as a spotlight for her victory lap. For me, it was simply the harsh light of interrogation. The main conference room at Keen Holdings was a masterpiece of intimidation. It was a glass-walled aquarium floating on the 20th floor, overlooking the ocean. Around the long mahogany table sat the people who held the fate of the Keen Group in their hands. There were 3 representatives from the creditor committee, 2 senior board members who looked like they had not slept in a week, and Julian Thorne, representing the bank's compliance division. And then, there was the family. Victor sat at the far end, looking shrunken in his suit. He was smiling vaguely, nodding at people who were not looking back at him. Diane sat next to him, radiant in a new navy blue suit that I knew she had charged to the company credit card despite the freeze. She looked like the Queen Mother attending a knighting ceremony. Graham Halford was there, too. He sat next to Sloane, drumming his fingers on the table. He looked sweaty. He kept checking his phone, likely watching the odds on whatever game he was betting on with money he did not have. Sloane sat perfectly still. She was pale, her hands folded on the table. When I walked in, she looked up and gave me a microscopic nod. It was the signal. I am ready. I walked to the head of the table. I did not smile. I did not greet them. I plugged my tablet into the presentation console. "Good morning," Diane chirped. She actually waved at the board members. "We are so thrilled to be here to finalize the alliance. My daughter has done such a wonderful job preparing the transition." She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with a delusion so potent it was almost admirable. "Go ahead. Mallory," she said benevolently. "Tell them the good news." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had forged my name, stolen my future, and then demanded I save her reputation. "Thank you, Mrs. Keene," I said. I pressed a button on the console. The lights in the room dimmed. The large screen behind me flickered to life. But it did not display a logo for a strategic alliance. It did not show a merger announcement. It displayed a stark, black and white title slide. Keene Group, Operational and Financial Forensic Audit. The smile on Diane's face faltered. "What is this? This isn't the presentation." I ignored her. I turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room, "as a condition of the liquidity injection requested by the Keene Group, my firm has conducted a 48-hour preliminary audit of the company's internal controls." I clicked the remote. The screen filled with data. Red lines zigzagged across a graph. "We have identified significant irregularities," I continued. "Specifically, $3 million in unallocated inventory costs over the last 5 years. These costs do not correspond to physical goods. They correspond to personal expenses filed under vague vendor codes." Graham stopped drumming his fingers. He went very still. I clicked again. "We also found evidence of cross-collateralization fraud, where the same assets were used to secure multiple loans from different institutions without disclosure." Victor blinked, looking at the screen as if it were written in a foreign language, but Diane understood. Her face hardened. "Mallory," she said, her voice sharp, "this is inappropriate. These are internal matters. We are here to discuss the future, not the past." I turned to her. "The past is what you are asking me to buy, Diane, and I do not buy damaged goods without an inspection." I clicked the remote a third time. The screen changed to a high-resolution scan of a document. It was the wire transfer from 8 years ago, the $28,000 stolen from my grandmother's trust. The room went dead silent. "This document," I said, pointing to the screen, "authorizes the transfer of trust funds to pay for the wedding of Sloane and Graham Halford. It bears the signature of the trustee, Victor Keene, and it bears the signature of the beneficiary, Mallory Keene." I paused. I let them look at the blue ink on the screen. "I did not sign this document," I said clearly. Diane stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That is enough," she shouted. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are lying. You are trying to humiliate us. This is a family dispute. It has no place in a board meeting." She turned to the creditors, her eyes wide and desperate. "She is vindictive. She has always been jealous of her sister. She is twisting the facts to hurt her father. Do not listen to her." I stood my ground. I did not shout back. I simply looked at Julian Thorne. "Mr. Thorne?" I said. Julian stood up. He adjusted his glasses. "First Regional Bank has verified the forgery," he said calmly. "We have the original carbon copy in our possession, provided by a whistleblower within the family." Graham bolted up. He looked at Sloane. "You gave them the copy? You stupid—" "Sit down." "Graham!" Calvin's voice boomed from the back of the room. My head of security took a step forward, his hand resting on his belt. Graham sat back down, looking like he might vomit. Diane was panting now. She looked around the room, realizing she was losing them. The board members were looking at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. "Mallory," Diane pleaded, changing tactics instantly. How can you do this? We are your parents. We raised you. We made a mistake. Yes, but we did it for the family, for Sloan. You cannot send your own father to jail. You cannot destroy us. I looked at her. I am not destroying you. I said, I am following the process. I pressed the final button on the remote. The screen changed one last time. It was a video file. Do you remember what you said to me on Tuesday? I asked. When you thought I was just an employee standing in your way? I hit play. The sound of the lobby filled the silent boardroom. Diane's voice, shrill and arrogant, echoed off the glass walls. Security, escort this woman out. She does not work here. She is a nobody. I paused the video on the frame where Diane was pointing her finger at me. Her face twisted in a sneer. It was like holding up a mirror. The Diane in the video and the Diane in the boardroom were the same person, entitled, cruel, and completely unaware of her own irrelevance. I turned to the board. My mother tried to have me removed from my own building because she believed I did not belong here. I said, she believed that power gave her the right to dismiss people who were inconvenient. I looked at Diane. Today, I am not acting out of revenge. I am acting out of fiduciary duty. You wanted to remove a stranger from your path. I am removing corruption from this company. I turned to the chairman of the creditor committee. I move that Victor Keene be immediately suspended from all executive duties, pending a full federal investigation. I said, I move that Diane Keene be barred from all company premises and restricted from accessing any financial accounts. And I move that the Keene Group be placed under the temporary conservatorship of Keene Holdings to protect the remaining assets for the employees. The chairman did not hesitate. Seconded, he said. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up. Even Victor, in his confusion, half raised his hand before dropping it. The gavel did not bang. There was just a quiet, final nod from the chairman. Motion carried. I looked at Calvin. Calvin, I said. He stepped forward, followed by two other security officers. Please escort Ms. Keene and Mr. Halford out of the building, I said. They no longer have clearance to be here. Diane stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The reality of it was finally hitting her. She wasn't leaving with a check. She wasn't leaving with a title. She was being evicted. Calvin stopped in front of her. He did not yell. He did not grab her. He was perfectly, brutally polite. Ma'am, he said, gesturing to the door, if you would please come with us. Diane looked at Victor, but he was staring at his hands. She looked at Graham, but he was already being pulled up by his arm by another guard. She looked at me. You are a monster, she whispered. No, Mother, I said softly. I am just the CEO, and you are trespassing. She turned and walked out. She tried to hold her head high, but her shoulders were slumped. The silence she left behind was heavy, but it was clean. Sloan was the only one left from the family side. She remained seated. I walked over to her. I placed a document in front of her. It was a plea agreement I had negotiated with Julian. If she cooperated fully with the investigation and testified against Graham and Diane regarding the financial fraud, the bank would not pursue charges against her personally. She would lose the house, the cars, and the status, but she would keep her freedom. Sloan picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking, but she signed it. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red, but they were clear for the first time in years. I am sorry, she said. It wasn't the apology of a child getting caught. It was the apology of an adult realizing the cost of her own weakness. I know, I said. You were right to leave, she said quietly. You were the only one of us who actually escaped. She stood up. She did not try to hug me. She simply gathered her purse and walked toward the door where Julian was waiting to take her statement. At the door, she paused. He is going to divorce me, you know, she said, referring to Graham. I looked at her. Good, I said. That is the best asset reduction you will ever make. Sloan managed a weak, watery smile. Then she walked out. The room was empty now. save for the board members who were already packing up their briefcases, discussing the transition plan. They treated me with a new level of respect. I wasn't just the fixer anymore. I was the person who had cut out the cancer, even when it shared my own DNA. I walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down to the lobby. The space was quiet. The afternoon sun was streaming through the glass doors, illuminating the white marble floor where, just 3 days ago, I had been almost thrown out. I walked to the center of the room. I stood on the exact spot where Diane had stood. I looked up at the wall behind the reception desk. The steel letters of Keen Holdings caught the light. I waited for the rush of triumph. I waited for the thrill of victory, but it didn't come. Revenge, I realized, is not a feeling of joy. It is simply the restoration of balance. The scales had been tipped against me for a decade, and now, finally, they were level. I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby tasted cool and crisp. It didn't taste like revenge. It tasted like freedom. I adjusted the strap of my bag, pushed open the glass doors, and walked out into the heat of the Florida afternoon. The world was noisy and chaotic and bright, and for the first time in my life, every single part of it belonged to me. No one could escort me out. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and reclaiming one's power. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on Mallory's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need to see that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms.